so where's traffic going to go then?
So what the applicant is proposing is to continue the township's collector road system per the comprehensive plan. The Orvis Way piece is also a part of that and was constructed by others.
But it was never designed to handle the traffic generated by this subdivision.
The township's comprehensive plan calls for a collector road to serve to alleviate the traffic congestion at 202 and 926. And that collector road is to extend from the Stetson jug handle all the way down to 926, which is Orvis Way and the proposed collector.
Yeah, you know, can you hear? Okay. On the collector road, this is hardly the design that we've seen in prior iterations of this development. The objective is to collect traffic off of 202 and facilitate it down to 926, I guess west or south, whatever that is, west. This looks like it's more of a collector road for your development, to facilitate traffic from your development out into the area. I don't know, it's hard for me just looking at this to think that this is going to mitigate any kind of traffic flow at 926 and 202.
The collector road is depicted on the plan as a direct connection between West Pleasant Grove Road and 926.
It's a circuitous route.
We have to be able to come out to Bridlewood at 926 per PennDOT's requirement. Our prior application had the intersection much further east, which would have given you more of a direct route. But because PennDOT governs where that intersection comes out, it has to move west. We also chose the location where we could minimize disturbance in the stream corridor there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you wind up creating more environmental disturbance.
I appreciate your, what you said.
Can you hear?
No.
Oh, I just said I appreciate your response. I guess if that's the case, then why not a more linear design?
Again, you do have residential traffic coming through here. It's a 28-foot wide road. So one of the issues that we're dealing with here in terms of balancing is, yes, it will be used for residential access, but at the same time, it's going to be used as a regional diversion. So if you have it as a straight shot, it becomes a super highway running through the middle of the property.
Intersection of South Mill Street and 926. Sounds like you would make some improvements on the Crebilly side. The other three intersections, or the other three pieces of that, you can't do anything with, and that is going to help to alleviate the traffic.
So the collector road removes traffic from this intersection and changes the pattern of traffic through this intersection. And in addition, the applicant is proposing to complete the traffic signal timing modifications to optimize the operations and also to provide the dedicated right turn lane along westbound 926, which can be done within the existing right-of-way or with property from the Robinson Tract. So they are proposing improvements, yes.
Nicole, I didn't see in the traffic analysis any environmental assessment or evaluation of the effect of the road on the property and the projected residences. Is this correct?
That is correct. It is not a part of the requirements of the traffic impact study.
Do you agree that there may be environmental impacts associated with the collector road being so close to the proposed residences?
I am not an environmental engineer, so I cannot speak to that.
Okay, so your report hasn't studied that and you don't know?
It is not required to, so it is not, no.
Nicole, would you agree that a reduction in the number of units would also ameliorate or mitigate some of the traffic impacts associated with the layout that you've proposed?
As I mentioned, with the collector road and other improvements by the applicant, there is no traffic impact that needs to be mitigated from this development.
That really wasn't, I'm sorry, Nicole, that wasn't the answer to my question.
Jack, are you asking her if she has less units, will it have less traffic impact?
That's correct.
Okay, that goes without saying.
Yes. Yes, if there are less units, less traffic will be generated.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all you needed to say, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Nicole, can you explain, so obviously PennDOT has to evaluate and you've submitted something to PennDOT. So if PennDOT themselves have said that left turn lanes are warranted on all approaches at 926 and New Street, but you're saying we don't own the land to do what's required, how does PennDOT deal with that situation? Can you explain that?
That's really up to PennDOT. I can't predict what they're going to comment on, but
What do they typically do when they tell you to do something and you don't own the land to do it?
you can't do it.
Do you have to suggest other improvements somewhere else? Is there other mitigation measures you have to suggest?
So if there is an impact, if there is a traffic impact from the development that cannot be mitigated because the applicant cannot construct a lane, because they don't have the right-of-way, then PennDOT would require improvements elsewhere. As I mentioned, because of the collector road and the other improvements, there is no traffic impact that is not mitigated at the intersection. So those are the nuances of the requirements.
Good evening, Nicole.
Good evening, Al.
So just to clarify, this is a new traffic study with a new submission.
It is a revised traffic study for a revised plan.
So this is not a new traffic study.
Sounded like she said yes.
It is different from the previous submission.
So the data it uses is still the old data that was collected a number of years ago.
The traffic counts that are the basis of this study are the same as the previous study, which are generally less than 3 years old, which is in conformance with PennDOT requirements.
Generally less than 3 years old.
Yes, I believe I did look, and there is one intersection that's older than 3 years.
And you remember ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers.
Yes.
And the best practice through ITE is 1 year. Okay. A good part of your conclusions are based on the assumed diversions, which you indicated that you didn't do any modeling of, you just reviewed the old studies and took the diversions. Did you speak to the engineers that developed those diversions?
No.
Did you look at the age of the data that was used to develop those diversions?
So we only looked at the patterns of the diversions, meaning the percentages, and applied them to newer volumes. So yes, there were some
So
studies.
you don't know how the diversions were developed?
Yes, there was some explanation in those previous studies that we reviewed. Again, the patterns seem to still be applicable based on the newer counts that we have completed, and therefore we applied them on a percentage basis.
So the 2015 counts were more reliable than the 2012 counts?
No, our counts are from 2017.
For southbound 202 at West Pleasant Grove Road, you're currently not proposing to do a right turn lane?
That was not explicitly called out in this study, no, as an improvement.
But even with the diversions, you are adding traffic to that route.
Yes, the end result is the addition of some traffic to that.
And since you are not required, based on this study, to make any improvement or to fix anything at 202 and 926, a good bit of those existing queues are still going to be there that would warrant people taking this right turn. So that's still going to be a heavy right turn.
Between that and Orvis Way, it's anticipated to still serve that alternate route to 202 and 926, yes.
By your projections, over 300 right turns an hour.
Correct, which is similar to without development conditions, but we are increasing.
Okay. At 926 and New, just to touch base on this a second, because you've been involved with projects where PennDOT has asked people to pursue improvements that required obtaining right-of-way, and PennDOT on occasion has asked applicants to make reasonable attempts to get right-of-way?
Correct. Typically when there is a traffic impact to be mitigated, yes.
So if it was determined that turn lanes were warranted at 926 and new, it might not be unreasonable to expect PennDOT to ask the applicant to at least make a reasonable effort to pursue obtaining right-of-way.
That could be a possibility.
They could also ask you to look at nonlinear alignments that would have more into the Robinson track and impact some of the other corners less.
They could, that is a possibility, they could ask for it.
Okay. A couple of your site accesses, I believe, at least according to this study, have exactly the minimum required site distance.
I believe one of the accesses that needs to be located at the top of the vertical crest on 926 is satisfying the minimum safe stopping site distance criteria.
And if additional site distance was required or determined to be warranted, or if there was some question about the measurement presented in that study, that would require additional grading along the roadway?
Potentially, and that, as we always note in our study, does need to be evaluated as the plans are further engineered to pay specific attention to ensure that those minimum criteria are satisfied or exceeded, yes.
Just switch topics from the vehicular to the non-vehicular. Did you address non-vehicular connectivity?
We do not address it in the traffic study, so I would have to defer to the site engineer to speak specifically to non-vehicular
So
connections.
in your opinion, pedestrians and bicycles are not traffic?
No, I disagree. At this point, it is not included in the traffic study.
That is a requirement for PennDOT to look at non-vehicular?
Yes, and we do anticipate having pedestrian accommodations at the signalized study intersection on 926, but the details of that have not been fully evaluated yet.
Is any connectivity proposed to the retail area at 926 and 202?
Again, we did not cover the pedestrian connections in the traffic study at this point, so I can't speak to that.
So in your opinion as a traffic engineer, is there a general attraction between residential and commercial areas that might generate pedestrian traffic?
I think there certainly can be, yes.
And just one last question to clarify. You've made several references to PennDOT having jurisdiction. Does PennDOT have jurisdiction over West Pleasant Grove Road with those accesses?
No, they do not. That is a township roadway. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Russ, you have questions?
What's the current level of service at 926 and 202?
Just want to refer to it just to confirm. So under existing conditions, the overall levels of service at 926 and 202 are F in the morning and F in the afternoon.
Yes.
And since you're not required to improve them, it will still be F.
So again, under future width development conditions, out to the year 2030, though that is where our projections are required to go. With the collector road, as envisioned by the township, it will alleviate some of the volume from 926 and New Street. So in 2030, with development, without PennDOT's 926 and 202 project, it will continue to operate at level of service F overall during both peak hours, but with less delay because there is less volume.
What does less delay mean? It's a 10-minute wait instead of a 15-minute wait?
So what we're required to evaluate is future without development conditions versus future with development conditions. that is where the traffic impact is determined. So I can speak to during the morning peak hour in without development, the intersection is overall level of service F. The amount of delay, and its average per vehicle, is about 107 seconds. With the development and the collector road and the traffic diversions, that goes down to about 95 seconds. In the afternoon, it goes from 134 in without development to 102 in with development.
Okay, thank you.
Can I, so when I'm standing in traffic or sitting in traffic, and I'm coming from South New to 202, and I'm trying to get into CVS, I'm trying to put this in lay language, and it's really heavy traffic, and I'm waiting there for about 12 minutes in real heavy traffic. Can you sort of square the circle for me where the 95 seconds, a minute, two, whatever, how does that play? Where does the 95 second, where does the delay start, where does the delay end?
So the analysis period that we're required to look at is the 60-minute period. And so the resultant overall level of service and delay, as I just mentioned some of those values, is average per vehicle over that entire period. So it represents, there are vehicles that wait much longer than that. There are other vehicles that get through in a shorter amount of time. So it's an average based on the analysis, and that's only at one intersection. So if the delay and the queues extend, then you would have to add cumulative delay from multiple intersections and along the segments.
So it's a misnomer to think that when you use an expression of, let's use the words 95 seconds, it's not a 95-second delay. What you're talking about is an increase of 95 seconds worse than it was. Am I correct?
No, that is not correct.
Okay, explain it.
So the 95 seconds that I mentioned is overall average intersection delay at one location per vehicle. So if you wanted to add up all of the average vehicle delay along a route, then you would need to add up multiple intersections. But the numbers that I mentioned right now are the overall delays per vehicle on average for the intersection of 926 and 202.
Okay, just bear with me for a second, because I may be the only person here who doesn't understand what you said. Does anybody understand what you said?
No.
So could you do me, I'm actually going to ask her, she's the expert. Can you explain that in a way that most people can understand? Because what you're saying is extremely confusing. I'm not trying to be pejorative towards you. I just don't get it. Because I'm still in traffic, and I'm still waiting 10 minutes to try to get from South New into CVS. Help you.
Aren't you just analyzing the delay as you're on 926 already and trying to turn on 202?
No, so it's an average, it's for all movements at the intersection. So while you experience a lot of delay on 202, this is an average of all movements at the intersection. So that average delay is driven down by movements that aren't delayed as much. So remember that this is total intersection. So it incorporates all movements at the intersection. So that is why maybe that value is less than what you would expect, given the delay that does absolutely occur on 202. So it's an average of all movements.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to ask everybody to keep it down. My other question for you is, what if to PennDOT, their hopeful time period to do something with 202 and 926 never happens, which is not the only real possibility in our lifetime? What happens then?
So under this plan, the collector road mitigates the traffic impact. Under the previous plan, the applicant committed to completing PennDOT's 926 and 202 improvement project that is currently on the tip, or a portion of it, to satisfy their mitigation requirements. So there are two mechanisms, one in each plan that addresses them.
But the net result, again, from the lay point of view, is
It's lousy now, and it's still going to be lousy, if not lousier, am I correct?
Better. It will be better, but it will still be failing in terms of the criteria, yes.
I have a question though.
I'm going to challenge you for just a second. Raise your hand if you sat on 926, the intersection of 202 for more than 5 minutes. Raise your hand if you sat there for more than 10 minutes. So, you're telling me now that all the way that I view it is you're just going to further back up the traffic on 926 to the intersection of Bridlewood Road.
Yes.
So now you're not only going to go through one way, you're going to have to go through 2 ways. Unless I'm missing something.
You have to keep in mind that we cannot require, the law does not allow the township to require the applicant to mitigate existing deficient improvements. So just, that's not what anyone wants to hear, but that is what the law is.
No, but I don't think that this plan is really going to, the roadway improvements proposed for the intersection of Bridlewood Road is going to do anything but further back the traffic.
And that's what Al's going to have to be able to speak to. The township traffic engineers going to have to evaluate the reports provided.
And then, maybe you mentioned it, but you didn't mention it, the intersection of South New and 926 currently serves at a level
of service E existing and would go to a level of service F and without development conditions in the future.
This is if there's no...
With the development, it would go to a level of service C overall in both peak hours.
Nicole, I'm sure that people are going to have questions for you, but we still may have questions for Gregg unrelated to traffic to your first part of the presentation. Go
I
ahead.
remembered what I wanted to ask, and it's probably going to be for Gregg and Andrew. So you mentioned, and Nicole just said, that the first conditional use plan, which obviously is on appeal, Toll proposed to do the improvements at 926 and 202. That was your mitigation. You now have presented this plan and said, this is our plan that's preserving our rights. We didn't want to do the connector road because we don't think it's good to bring regional traffic in. If all things being, if you got to decide what is the best way to design your plan and how you want to spend the money to make traffic improvements, which plan would you prefer to do?
It would be the first one.
And so with that, you would be committed to doing the improvements in 926 and 202?
Yes, that's correct.
And how does that, if those are done by you, does that improve some of these intersections in a better way? Does it decrease the delay, or does it improve the levels of service at these intersections that people are struggling with?
You're talking about the prior application.
And the prior application with Toll Brothers doing the improvements in 926 and 202.
I don't know if you have it here, but you can speak generally to it.
The entirety of the improvement package that the applicant committed to in the previous application mitigated their improvements. And so we would go back to providing that package of improvements.
But you can't speak to specific intersections. I mean, you didn't propose to do anything to 926 and 202 other than, I think, traffic signal optimization.
Signal optimization, as I recall, was the improvement that was a part of the package.
So it seems like this plan does do some better decrease of, I'm not saying that very well. There is some improvements to some of the other intersections as a result of this plan.
Yes, but it's not because of this development. So the collector road mitigates regional traffic, which then improves the intersections. So when you look at it in development-specific context, we mitigate. But yes, when you have this one up here, it does a regional fix. So of course it's going to increase traffic, or not increase traffic, make it better in terms of a level of service. Even if it's still an F, it's better than a lousy F at that intersection at 202 926, and that was by design. I mean, that's what the township wanted, right? But the law says we only have to mitigate what our impact is. And that's what you just said as well. So that's the duality that we're playing with.
Just quickly back to 926 and you. Just to clarify, your analysis assumes that before your development is built, that there will be a great improvement by someone retiming the signal.
It does not. It includes, as Al, you are aware, PennDOT requires us to show optimized signal timings in without development conditions. So we showed it both ways. This was a discussion during the previous application as well. The township felt that we were taking advantage and assuming someone else would do that. That's why we've explicitly said the applicant is willing to do that. The township doesn't want us to include it, but PennDOT requires us to include it. So we're trying to address that by saying clearly the applicant will do it, but that's how we have to evaluate it for PennDOT.
You have to evaluate it for PennDOT, but if there could be, if I recall correctly, it goes from level of service F to level of service C by taking time away from the critical corridor to the minor approach. Is that an improvement, a timing adjustment that PennDOT would approve?
So in this case, we did take some time away from 926. We kept it at acceptable levels of service. But again, regardless of whether we utilize this optimization plan in terms of signal timing or something slightly modified, even without signal optimization, we show that with this plan in the collector road, that the development impact is mitigated.
Before we, I'm going to say thank you. There may be questions from the audience for you. For the Planning Commission, do you have any questions for Gregg or for Andrew regarding anything that Gregg said at the beginning of the meeting? Do you have a question?
So Gregg, one of the big concerns from the Planning Commission and the board was this location of the Battle Granny Line and where troops may have marched. What did you do to address that concern, if anything, on the new plan?
We did pull some of the homes off of the swath area along the western side, and that was one of the comments that was raised. However, we obviously have continued disagreement over where that battlefield swath was, may have been, might not have been, whether it has any legal significance or not. So all those issues remain. But to that extent, we did take that into account when we pulled it off, pulled those homes off of the western side to keep that entire western swath open.
Any other questions from the Planning Commission? Jack?
Yes, Craig, at the beginning you indicated that the Constitution also protects property rights, which I agree that it does.
Correct.
However, I believe that both can be aligned or made compatible, but one doesn't dominate over the other.
That's correct. That's how you interpret the Constitution, so that one constitutional right can't eviscerate the other.
Correct. So I maintain that to the extent that the proposed use of the property conflicts with the provisions of Article 1, Section 27, those effects have to be reduced to insignificant levels. But you can still use your property.
I didn't think that was a question. That was a statement, right, Jack?
Assume rising inflection.
At the end? So first of all, I don't believe it applies in a conditional use context. Okay, so I think the law is clear on that issue. When you get into land development, I think it's still subject to dispute as to what level Article 1, Section 27 plays in an application on one, private property. And then two, even if it was public property or a public resource, to what extent balancing all the environmental regulations that you already have in an ordinance plus the environmental regulations that get applied, whether that satisfies Article 1, Section 27, and that requirement. So it's a very large legal battle that you and I are going to debate for a long time until the Supreme Court comes down with something more definitive as it applies to land development. You're looking at me with a deep stare.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to do two things. One is that the next part of this program is going to be any questions or comments you have. I'll give you the instructions in a second. What I'm going to ask is the Planning Commission can come up and take their seats again. And I do have a question for Gregg and Andrew. Simply put, if we need access to any of your consultants, even though you said this is the only meeting you're coming to, if we ask you, will you bring one of your consultants to answer any of our questions?
And I agree with Andrew. He just said if you had questions, you could put it in writing and then we would respond. Because once the hearing is open, we wouldn't want statements that are used at a planning commission meeting somehow to contravene something that's being said for whatever purpose. So we understand your request, and we would certainly respond if we can.
We're going to take a 10-minute break. If you would, you've got microphones over here. You've got two microphones over here. You start lining up now. I'm going to ask you to keep your questions short, your comments short. As Russ said in the beginning, if it becomes repetitive, we'll respectfully step in. But what we want to do is get to as many of your comments and questions as possible. You've got 10 minutes to get over.
Yeah.